Geeks and geekettes and all readers of comics, be they rabid or casual, welcome to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, Chuck Dixon, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And last week, I told you that the question bag was empty and I needed some reinforcements. And you folks delivered. If I don't get to your question this week, I will in the coming week. So you sent a flurry of questions, a plethora of questions, and keep them coming. Keep them coming. A couple of you sent me so many questions in one email that I'll have to break it up over a few weeks. So, hey, let's get started. Dan Battle says, what was it like at DC when the next generation of Batman writers showed up, mainly Brubaker and Rucka? I'm curious how they got along with you, since it's pretty obvious they lean heavy to the left. Not that that's always an issue. It certainly wasn't an issue with Greg and Ed and myself. I don't think politics ever entered the picture that I was aware of. We certainly had our differences, but they were largely creative. As far as, for those of you not aware, I mean, for a long time, the main Batman writers were myself, Doug Mensch, and Alan Grant. Doug and Alan and I were fired off of our main Batman books, but I continued working on Batman-related titles, through 2002, which means I was there to greet the new core Batman writers, who were Greg Rucka, Ed Brubaker, and Devin Grayson. And we had a new editor, Bob Schreck, although he was largely absent, mostly indifferent. he held the title of editor. I assume someone was trafficking the artwork in scripts. I know it wasn't him. Now, as to how did I get along with my fellow writers, Ed Brubaker, I got along great with Ed. Yeah, we had our political differences, but we usually made a joke out of it. I think that Ed found me interesting, like a zoo animal, because my ideas were so different from his. But when it came to Batman, I think we were simpatico entirely. And, at summits and business lunches and things like that, we truly enjoyed each other's company. And I thought that Ed got it. Now, as for Greg Rucka, well, there's a lot of you out there who know me very well who are holding your breath right now. Let me illustrate Greg and my relationship with a story. Denny O'Neil read a couple of Greg's crime novels. Craig started as a mystery novelist, and he read a couple of his crime novels and reached out to him, thought he might be a good Batman writer, and eventually brought him into the offices to go out to lunch, get to know one another, blah, 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 see if this was a good fit. And Denny at one point invited the associate editors, Scott Peterson, Jordan Gorfinkel, and Darren Vincenzo, in to meet Greg, a meet and greet. Here's this guy, and I'm going to start giving him some Batman assignments. And Denny sang his praises as a writer. And the guys later told me that when they left this meeting, one of them said to the other two, this guy and Chuck are going to mix like fire and gasoline. And the other two nodded, yeah, this isn't going to be pretty. And it never was. So, creatively in every other way, maybe it was two alpha dogs in the same room kind of situation or whatever, but we circled each other like cats in a cage for the majority of the time that we were collaborators or partners or associates on the Batman titles. And that's all I'll say, because my mom said if you can't say something nice. Okay, Jerry Bingham's asking questions. With comics, graphic novels, Arctoons, your continuing novel series, Bad Times, Levon Cade, Sidewinders, and now Conan, most of us are probably amazed at how prolific you are. How about giving us a breakdown of your standard workday? Do you allot a certain number of hours from each day to each of your current projects, or do you set aside particular days of the week for each? Perhaps you have file drawers filled with old stories yearning for the light of day. L's on your keyboard in the middle of the night? Do you have time to self-edit, or is everything first draft like Stephen King claims? Does your family visit you? A lot of you longtime fans will remember Jerry, who is now an very accomplished painter and illustrator. But he was once one of us, a comic book guy, Iron Man, Batman, a number of other characters that he was strongly associated with, largely back in the 80s. And Jerry recently did the cover paintings for my two most recent Sidewinders Westerns. So that's his bona fides. Okay. As far as my work day, I kind of, get up, eat breakfast, sit down, do what all the rest of us do, catch up with emails and social media and the rest, and then eventually wind myself up to get to whatever assignment it is I'm working on that week. And I usually go week by week. I don't set days aside. If I'm writing a comic or graphic novel, that's what I'm doing that week. And I generally try to finish a script in a week, so they don't have to think about it over the following weekend. Now, recently I wrote a 90-page graphic novel that it took 3 weeks. But that's all I did was work on that. Novels, prose novels are a whole different thing. That's all day, every day for, a couple of months or more, depending on the length of the novel or the difficulty or whatever. The most recent, the second Conan novel, which I just completed yesterday, I kind of had to break up over time because other assignments kept demanding attention. But that was okay because the first novel isn't even published, so I'm well ahead of schedule. And of course, that's the secret to my, my being able to be as prolific as I am, is I stay way ahead of schedule so that when new things pop up, new assignments, new opportunities, I've got room to do them. And so I put aside the Conan novel for a few weeks and did this other job. As far as the ArcToon stuff, the nature of ArcToons, which is basically every episode is like 2 pages of comics, I can spend just a couple of days and write a month or more worth of ArcToons episodes, to keep the artists busy. So ArcToons is very easy to catch up with. Every few months, I just have to spend a couple of days staying ahead. And of course, in my mind, I know where the plots are going. I've walked through the story, as a comic creator once described it. Which brings us to the fact: do I have file drawers full of story ideas? Well, I've got some story ideas that were either rejected, delayed, or I never handed in, or I never pitched, sitting on my hard drives. But largely, those file drawers that you speak of are in my head. I've got all kinds of stories in my head that I'd love to get to someday. It's just a matter of finding the time to do so. Right now, I'm committed novel-wise. I mean, I know the next 4 novels I'm going to have to write to fulfill my commitments, and some of them are in various degrees of completion. The next one I begin working on next week is the next Levon Cade novel. So that'll probably take me, into probably Thanksgiving to work on. I have no pressing comic book assignments at the moment. But my work day is generally that. I, eat breakfast, go through the emails, get to work, and, press on until from probably 11 in the morning till maybe 4 or 5. And then I break to, get on the recumbent bike or the elliptical machine, do a little free weights, because, writing is a sedentary lifestyle. So you got to fight the urge to just sit all day, which I would do. I would sit into the wee hours writing, except That's not a healthy lifestyle. So that's generally it. A writer's life is kind of haphazard. You know, there's no set time. I don't know how many words I'll be able to turn out each day. 2,000 word day on a prose novel is really good. In comics, I set myself a 5-page minimum, often exceed that. I used to have an 8-page minimum, but that's back when I was really cranking it in the 90s. So 5-page minimum, so I can easily finish a script in 1 week. Yeah, and I don't have any advice on how to do this stuff. This is how I do it. I don't suggest that anybody else try to do what I do, or use my methods or my quote unquote process, to use an airy fairy term for writing. Yeah, I think I answered all your questions. That's what my day is like. And does my family visit me? Yeah, occasionally they poke their head in, particularly if there's some sort of household emergency or whatnot. And every once in a while, doctor's appointments or dental visits or things just totally interrupt my flow. But as William Goldman said in a book I read recently, a writer has to jealously guard his writing time. And I think that's great advice, to not let too many things interfere. But I've always worked at home and we homeschooled. So I think that, you know, I've spent an awful lot of time with my family, a lot more than most people do. And we all still like each other. It's remarkable after all these years. So, Jonathan Young, I've been wanting to collect a few epic collection volumes of Stan and Kirby's run on Fantastic Four. What are some of their best issues, arcs, or your personal favorites? Also, what would you say are their best Doctor Doom stories? Lastly, what are your thoughts on the Marvel Epics collection format? Yeah, the format's good. I mean, it's a relatively inexpensive way to get a big old chunk of Marvel stuff. But the thing with those Epic collections I found is that you got to buy them right away. You got to pre-order them or get them right when they came out, because boy, the prices on those things spike up sharply within months of their publication. So, you know, I've learned, to my regret, that waiting to pick one of these up if you wanted one is a mistake. This isn't for me to urge you to go out and buy Marvel product, but just as a fan and fellow collector and fellow aficionado, it's just my advice is if you see an Epic collection you want on pre-order it, because you're going to pay dearly if you miss out and a few months later have to, you know, buy it from scalpers in the secondary market. As far as which Fantastic Four Lee and Kirby stories I would suggest, I mean, there's like all of them. They're all great. Doctor Doom in particular. I'm going to go real geeky here, friends. So if you can't stand a total, you know, 5-alarm nerd out, go watch something else. Yeah, my first exposure to the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom was his very first appearance in Fantastic Four #5. I still have that comic. Bought it at the neighborhood drugstore. Bought it at Malloy's drugstore back in the day. And it is just, it's in horrible condition because I read this comic so many times. It's a great intro to a villain. And it's just a hell of a story. You know, and you don't really learn a whole lot about Doctor Doom, except that he's vindictive, petty, extremely powerful, utterly ruthless. You know, the perfect supervillain. And man, does he hate Reed Richards. And he don't like Ben Grimm much either. But it's a really cool story, and it's jam-packed. These early Marvel comics were jam-packed with story. Not only do you get Doctor Doom introed and kind of an idea, not an origin, but kind of a backstory on him as to why he's so hateful toward Reed Richards, but there's also time travel. The Fantastic Four go back to the pirate era, and it's just a hell of an issue. And you know, as I said, my first exposure to this comic at all, I fell in love with the Fantastic Four, and I just dug Doctor Doom the most. And so how happy was I when the very next month, Fantastic Four 6, Doctor Doom returns with Submariner. Now this is my first time I'd ever seen Submariner. I didn't know anything about this character, but he instantly rose in my admiration, by the end of this issue, I thought he was every bit as cool as Doctor Doom. So I was going to be devoted to this title. I was never going to miss an issue. And I recall this issue very well because Doctor Doom and Namor kind of team up to go against the FF. But Doctor Doom, turns out he was using Namor as a pawn because Doom, as I said, he's ruthless. He's a chess player. And he doesn't care about anybody but himself and his own, selfish ambitions. And so he screws Namor over in a in a wacky sequence in which Doctor Doom uses a tractor beam to uproot the Baxter building and draw it into space, hoping to asphyxiate the Fantastic Four, assuming also everyone else in the building, although we never see them, and Namor as well. So he's just going to kill his former ally and his enemies all in one fell swoop. But that doesn't work out because Namor is such a badass that he just leaps into space and launches himself toward Doom's rocket ship. And I vividly recall reading this comic on the front stoop of my house in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, with a bunch of neighborhood kids reading it over my shoulder with me. And we were all just reading. It was one of those things where, no, don't turn the page yet. Okay, now you can turn the page. Because everybody had to catch up. So we're reading this comic together, and we got to this page, and in unison we went, go, go, go. It's just a great moment. It's also a great moment in comics. And one of the first instances as a comic reader that I realized how cinematic comics are. Because here Kirby chooses to basically close in, dolly his camera in, to give us this true sense of motion, suspense. And man, what a page turn panel that last panel is. I mean, what's going to happen now? Is he going to make it? What's going to happen? And this is really my first instance of starting to pay attention to storytelling in comics, because this is such a perfect representation of how you create, movement using static images. And I dug it. And these Doctor Doom stories are a lot of the reasons that I write comics now, because they just really opened my mind to what the medium could do, and Fantastic Four in general. Another great Doom story is Fantastic Four Annual number 2, which is his origin, which Lee and Kirby make the conscious decision, and I imagine it was Kirby that did it, make the conscious decision to present Doctor Doom's story in the form of like a universal monster movie. And it really is. It's very much like a Wolfman or a Frankenstein type movie in its presentation and tone and everything else. And it's an epic story with a really good Doctor Doom framing device. Now, what I liked about Doctor Doom, what made him different than other villains in comics were, you would read Batman or Superman, and they would be plagued by the Joker or Lex Luthor or whatever. But there was no continuity. There was no explanation of how Luthor got out of jail or how Joker, escaped from drowning or whatever condition that the villain was left in the last story, that either that left him incapacitated or imprisoned, or in other words, in some way incapable of doing any more evil, so that the hero can win. These things were never revisited, so that villains would just pop up again with no explanation of, shouldn't you be in jail? But Lee and Kirby decided that with each appearance or reappearance of Doctor Doom, that Doctor Doom's reappearance be explained. I mean, how did he escape being left adrift in space, or left back in the past, or left at the bottom of the ocean, or whatever, or vanished in a disintegrator beam, and then he returns? And they would always take pains to explain, Doom got out of that, and this is how he comes back to plague the FF once more. But there's so many great Doom stories. Every Doom story by Lee and Kirby is a good one. They never phoned it in. on this character, which is what made him so enduring. You knew when Doctor Doom showed up, it was going to be a badass story. That the crap had hit the fan. It's Doom, and so many Lee and Kirby stories, and so many creators after them would use the device of, the last page shocker is the arrival of Doctor Doom, so that the next issue is going to be, oh my God, it's the FF are in trouble once again. And that was a kind of a hallmark for the Fantastic Four title, was this idea of rising stakes, and each new villain seemed more threatening, more dangerous than the last. I remember reading the issue of FF with the Molecule Man and being absolutely convinced as a 9 or 10-year-old that this was it. This is the last issue of Fantastic Four. They're never going to be able to defeat this guy. This is it. This guy whipped their butts, and they're never coming back from it. But of course, Reed always found a way for the FF to triumph, and they did come back again and again and again for hundreds and hundreds of issues. But when you're a kid, it's total suspension of disbelief. But of all the great villains that the FF faced, Doom would always be the most dangerous, the most threatening, their true arch nemesis, and all of that, is brought to life by Lee and Kirby and their dedication to making this character different. And Doom is different. He's the first comic book villain I can think of that I felt some sympathy for, because his backstory is tragic. You can understand his motivations even if you can't excuse them. And because he has the failings of a human, he's petty and vindictive and jealous and the rest of it. I mean, we've all felt that way in our lives. We've all had low points in our lives, but hopefully we got over them. Doom didn't, which is what makes him a great supervillain. He doesn't get over. He holds a grudge like an Irishman. So, that's what makes him cool. Plus the costume, what a great costume. And the whole demeanor and the Latveria background, the sort of Ruritania, Austro-Hungarian Empire kind of back history that he has, from another era. It all just serves to make Doom the coolest, most effective villain ever created in comics. Now, of course, there's other great runs in the FF. The Galactus story is absolutely amazing. Probably the only story that I wasn't really enamored of, even though it's still very good. I didn't like the Inhumans stuff. I think they spent way too long with the Inhumans on this book. I found them pretentious and boring. I didn't find them particularly interesting. But in the end, they created sort of a neat kind of background or almost alternate universe kind of thing for the FF to explore. And I think Kirby was like trying out new ideas. But the Galactus thing, I mean, amazing. I mean, I thought Silver Surfer, when I first saw these covers of Silver Surfer on them, thought it was the dumbest idea ever. And then when I read the first issue with Silver Surfer, by the end of the story, he was like my favorite Marvel character, because there's never been an idea so idiotic that Kirby couldn't make it work. That's the value of true earnestness. And the other cool thing about the Surfer and the Galactus story is it led to a great Doctor Doom story, in which Doom overpowers Silver Surfer, steals the power cosmic, and steals the surfboard, which I just thought was just an amazing twist. Just cool stuff, and a way to like build on an earlier storyline and create a really cohesive continuity that you felt you were part of, because you had been reading it from the beginning and you got all the Easter eggs and you got all the references. Another absolutely awesome Fantastic Four story, one of my favorites, is annual number 4, the Annihilus story, where Sue Storm is pregnant, with the baby who would be Franklin Richards. She's in danger of her life, and the only solution to her problem is in the negative zone. And Ben and Reed and Johnny go into the negative zone and encounter a nihilist. And it's just a hell of a story, just a hell of an adventure story with the usual rising stakes and excruciating suspense that Lee and Kirby were able to create in this title. Now, as for collecting these things, I mean, yeah, the Epic collections are fine. The omnibuses are obviously better, but I'm gonna plug something that I see no money from. Taschen Books, I believe they're a German publisher. They did these two great collections of the earliest issues of Amazing Spider-Man and the Avengers in these massive, oversized hardcovers, which are just so beautifully produced. They reprint them on a matte paper, which is like comic book paper but of a higher grade, and then the covers are on the slicker laminated stock, so you really get the feel of the old comic, and the artwork has been restored. It's just stunning. These are just stunning collections. Tears came to my eyes when I first opened this thing. They're expensive. And the reason why I mention them is they are doing a Fantastic Four volume. I think the first 24 issues of FF, including the first annual, which this Spider-Man collection includes the first annual, and I believe the second annual as well. But if you got the cash, or you're writing a Dear Santa letter, if you love the comics from this period, I urge you. I mean, I see no money from this. I get nothing from it. This is a fan-to-fan, true confession. This format is incredible, absolutely incredible. I can't sell it hard enough. And they retail for about $200. I've found you can pick them up for about $170 if you look around. But you won't be sorry. You will not be sorry. All right, JL. What are your favorite moments with Oracle in your time writing the character for Birds of Prey and the various Batman-related books? What would you say sets Oracle apart from her peers in the DC universe? What would you say made Oracle have such an impact on readers with disabilities in an age where representation is not as common as today? The first thing that leaps to mind is Birds of Prey #8. It's kind of the real beginning of the romance, the relationship between Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon, and it's a favorite among fans. It was a favorite of mine. I really enjoyed writing it, although it was a bit of a challenge. And as I've described before, this issue was editorially driven. The editors requested an issue like this, where there wasn't any fighting or violence, any of the rest of it, that it was just Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon on a date talking. Well, I don't like those kind of stories, so I did my own version. So we got the same end result. They do indeed go on a date, but it culminates with Dick Grayson encouraging Barbara to once again get on the trapeze with him. And, it's kind of a touching story without being schmaltzy or overly sentimental. It's also a very romantic story, and readers liked it. And it's one of those books I sign a lot of. I sign a lot of these at appearances and conventions and things like that. That's how I gauge the popularity of something. Also, the fact that it's sold out faster than almost any book I've ever done. I don't understand why DC didn't go to a second printing for it. They easily could have gone to a second printing for this issue, but they didn't. And for a long time, this book was never collected anywhere. But it was a high point for me on Oracle, and Oracle for me. A lot of the high points involve Dick Grayson and the romance that I kind of drove as a writer, since I was writing both Birds of Prey and Nightwing. Most of the Dick and Babs stories are mine, and so they were kind of meaningful to me. But overall, the Birds of Prey arc uh, was special to me because I really dug the Oracle character, and tried to, I didn't, a character like Oracle, it's tempting to make her, Miss Explaino. She's just Deus Ex Machina. When they're in trouble, she, hits the keyboard and comes up with all the solutions magically by, surfing the internet. And I didn't want that to be the case. In fact, in a lot of cases, her technical expertise actually causes problems as she quickly discovers that the internet is a source of disinformation as often as it is the truth, or you only find half the truth in the digital medium, and so things like that, and then creating physical challenges for someone who is a paraplegic was interesting, but without being demeaning or insulting or any of the rest of it. Jordan Gorfinkel, who was the first editor on Birds of Prey and really the creator of Birds of Prey, he put me in contact with someone who was wheelchair bound. And we heard over the years from a number of people who were, in a wheelchair or partially paralyzed. And but the first advice we got was, don't use one of those wheelchairs with the handles on the back. You don't want to make it seem as though Barbara's being pushed around by anybody. And that was good advice. And then that led to, well, how adept can you get in a wheelchair? And of course, we see athletes playing basketball and different sports, and the things they're able to do in a wheelchair are quite amazing. And so that was a big thing for us. And then, I wanted Babs to never be a victim, never be a hostage, be perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Of course, she's an underdog character. She's a woman who's disabled, and she seems primed to be a victim. And I always wanted the bad guys to underestimate her for that, and her to show that she could kick ass just like anybody else. And so, we showed her in the comics, training with a bow staff, things that would increase her reach, that would work for her, and her limited capabilities. And a funny aside, I got to meet Dina Meyer, who played Barbara Gordon, who played Oracle in the Birds of Prey TV series. And she said that the thing that this made her most was, she said, I read the comics and I practiced in a wheelchair till I got really good in a wheelchair. She says, I even took martial arts lessons using a staff. And the instructor showed me how to fight from a sitting position and how to use the chair to my advantage. And she says, I worked all these things out on my own, and I got to the set the first day, and they had an electrically driven chair. And she said, I tried to explain to them that isn't the character. The character wouldn't use a chair like that. She's not Professor X. And, of course, they're TV producers, so they know better. But I thought that was interesting. Both the fact that she took the comic book so seriously, obviously far more seriously than the showrunners, and that, they could get something that was so obviously presented in the comic, get it that wrong. Now, of all the stories I wrote of Oracle, the one I remember a lot, and most people don't even remember this, was it was an Our World at War one-shot. The Our World at War, which was a Superman-driven cross-company event. I don't recall the reason why, but they wanted a one-shot. I think it's a 48-page or 64-page story, and it's largely Nightwing and Oracle, and it's a time travel story. We all know how much I love time travel stories, how much my wife hates it when I write them, but with art by Rick Leonardi. And I wish this comic was better known. I had a lot of fun writing it, Rick just kills it on the art. It's gorgeous artwork, and it's really the only real Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon adventure where they're together on a case, and it was a good memory for me. But thanks for the question. Kevin Cruz. Two of my favorite comics have two writers. These are Immortal Iron Fist by Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction, and The Valiant by Matt Kint and Jeff Lemire. Have you been credited with another writer in a book? How is it to work with other writers? What are the pros and cons? Well, I've co-written with a few people. Batgirl Year One, Robin Year One, Nightwing Year One were written by myself and Scott Beatty. Scott Beatty was an editor at Toy Fair magazine, and we met at the Toy Fair, New York Toy Fair. He got me an invite because there were a lot of Bane toys coming out that year, and they wrote a feature about me visiting the Toy Fair in Toy Fair magazine. And during that visit, sort of 2-day geek out surrounded by toys, we hit it off and found we had a real rapport. We liked a lot of the same things, and we started proposing writing stuff together. And the result, Robin Year One, Nightwing Year One, Batgirl Year One, these things are perennial favorites. They've been very seldom out of print for any period of time since we did them. They're very popular, perennial sellers. And I think the extraordinary popularity of them has to do a lot with the fact that the two of us wrote it together. He and I have very much the same sensibilities in comics. We like to bring humor in. We like a lighter touch to the stories, but we like an earnestness to the characters. We take this stuff very seriously. We don't take ourselves very seriously, but we take this work very seriously. And also, Scott has this deep encyclopedic knowledge of all things DC Comics. And so he was able to bring, lots of Easter eggs and hidden stuff and really exploit the continuity, because when we did these year ones, we didn't want to change anything. We wanted to enhance it. We wanted to dramatize things that perhaps had been only mentioned in passing in the past. So we weren't out to rewrite the history of these characters. We were more out to illuminate them, to build upon them. And Scott's knowledge of all of that stuff was great. I mean, the only continuity geeky Easter egg that I was able to contribute was in Batgirl Year One, when Batgirl first appears, as she did in the original Origin, at a costume party. The Elongated Man and his wife Sue Dibney are also at that party. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because in the issue of Detective, when Batgirl first appears, her origin issue, the backup story was an Elongated Man story in which they went to a costume party. Obviously, Gardner Fox had costume parties on the brain that month, because both stories have a costume party sequence. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if we find out they were all at the same party? So that was my geeky contribution. Scott's were many, many, many. In the Nightwing Year One, I wrote the sequence where Nightwing has to defuse a bomb. Scott is the one who thought of including the line from the Batman Adam West movie, "Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb." But our method of writing was the way I always write with a co-writer: is we both agree on a generalized plot. We meet somewhere and actually talk the plot out, and then one of us begins writing. One of us will say, well, I'll take the first sequence and then you'll write the next, and just sort of hand it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so that's how we did it. And, it was successful. We worked together quite often. Together we conceived of the Last Laugh cross-company crossover, one of the last that I worked on when I was at DC, which was extraordinarily successful, and we had a ball doing that. And so I mean, it's kind of an organic way of working, and The other writer has to work in my scripting format, but my scripting format is classic comic scripting, so no problems there. And I think most of the guys I work with in the past have adopted that format. Now, another collaborative effort was me and Bo Smith wrote a miniseries for Eclipse called The Black Terror. And it was initially Bo's idea, and he asked me if I would help write it. And I said, yeah, let's do that. And again, it was an organic kind of thing. We agreed on a generalized plot line and took off from there. And it's interesting that, our big MacGuffin in this story, the big, James Bond Destructo villain plot, was the bad guys were going to explode a low-yield nuclear device on Wall Street to shut down the New York stock market. And they had some nefarious reason where they were going to get really rich from doing that. And I remember Kat Ironwood, who was our editor on this, thought that idea was preposterous. And of course, 9/11, two airplanes crashing into the World Trade Center shut down the New York stock market. And of course, there's been threats of low-yield dirty bombs again and again. Have been thwarted by our law enforcement agencies and military. But anyway, again, it was an organic method. We agreed on a regular plot, but it was a very loose plot. And so Bo and I took turns writing each other into corners. And the weird thing about Bo is, not Bo, but Bo and I, when we're together, we're kind of like the Leopold and Loeb of comics. You put the two of us together, and I don't know, we come up with the kind of demented ideas we wouldn't come up with on our own. And so this book gets, I don't like dark. I don't like intentionally writing dark, but this book gets dark. And I don't know what it is we bring out in each other, but the book is very nasty and mean and brutal. But that's how Bo and I roll. So, for whatever reason, we're like two brothers from another mother. What one doesn't think of, the other one does. Now, that wouldn't be the last time we worked together. We worked together a few other times, most notably on Batman Wildcat miniseries and a Catwoman Wildcat miniseries, both illustrated by our mutual buddy, Sergio Cariello. And Bo's I'm a big fan of Wildcat too, but Bo is an enormous fan of Wildcat. And he originally proposed these, and I thought, well, let's pitch it together. And we did. And once again, our dark chemistry emerged. And I gotta say, these are probably the most brutally violent comics code comic stories you will ever read. I am stunned that we got a lot of this stuff past the code. I mean, these things are just bone-crunchingly violent and nasty, and created some terrific villains. Bo has and I mean this in the best terms, he has this sledgehammer approach to writing, and I just kind of went along with it. I kind of rode the surf, but it was a lot of fun. And just as I did with Scott Beatty, I generally would write the openings, and then the next sequence was Bo's. But as I said, these were far more loosely plotted than the year one books, so we kept writing each other into corners that the other had to get out of. And it's just a lot of fun to work on. Now, another frequent co-writer of mine, Graham Nolan. Graham and I worked on this Joe Frankenstein series together. It was initially Graham's idea. This was a concept that Graham had for years, and every once in a while would discuss it with me. I really want to do this. I have this idea. Graham's a huge fan of the Universal monster movies. And, again, just like Bo with Wildcat, I'm a fan of the Universal monster movies too, but I'm not as dedicated, I'm not as huge a devotee of them as Graham is, encyclopedic knowledge of those old movies. And he wanted to do this series, and he talked about his frustrations in creation and, how to pitch it and everything else. And I made a few suggestions that kind of changed his mind on how he wanted to approach the material. And that's when he invited me on to co-write. And so, as Graham and I always do, we, you know, spend a lot of time plotting, a lot of time back and forth. When I work with Graham, the things are much more carefully plotted because, you know, he's going to be drawing it, but he wants a lot of input. And quite honestly, Joe Frankenstein is his creation. You know, I was fortunate enough to be asked to partner up with him and help out. But it's his baby. So we, you know, worked out a way of writing that gave him lots of freedom. Because, I mean, I wanted him to have, because it was his creation, I wanted him to have lots of elbow room to do his thing. And so I wrote in kind of a hybrid script plot format. It was just plot. It wasn't, I didn't break it down to panels or pages or any of the rest of it. And, but I included a lot of the dialogue so he would understand the emotional tone I was going for, and you know, understand the voice I was going for with the characters. And then again, all of this was left up to collaboration. There were changes made beyond that. It was once again a very organic process with both of us, you know, pitching in 100% to try to make the property better. I mean, when you do this, after a while, you forget whose idea was what because it's not important anymore. It's the product of both of you. You're both the, you know, the parents of these projects, and but you know, I like working with Graham because he's blunt. If he doesn't like something, he lets you know right away. There's no candying around. There's no glad handing or any of the rest of it. You know where you stand with Graham all the time, so, which makes it, you know, it's refreshing to do. Not that it wasn't that way with Scott and Bo, but with Graham, it's he's direct. Let me say that, and it's very much appreciated. And of course, it's not the only time that we would collaborate. Had a long run together on Detective, and Graham had a lot of input into those stories. I generally would script them, you know, full script, but we would talk about arcs and things like that. And I basically wanted to make sure that I was writing the kind of stories that Graham would enjoy drawing. I didn't want to write something that he didn't approve of because we were partners on the book. But on Joker, the Devil's Advocate, we did the same thing we did on Joe Frankenstein. Is we worked. We actually met in New York, stayed in New York for a couple of days, and you know, on our own dime, and hashed out this plot line. And if you've ever read it, it's a very complex whodunit mystery, and it took a lot of working out to work. I mean, I knew generally what I wanted to do going into it. I mean, I knew the core of the mystery, but the two of us we wrote on 3x5 cards, and you know, okay, this has to happen, and then we decided what order. It was very much written as some screenwriters work when they collaborate. So quite a bit of time went into plotting this thing, and then the full script was mine. And of course, once again, even when the full script is done, you know, Graham had input, changes that he wanted to make, suggestions to make the visuals better, blah, 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 blah. And I'm always open to that, especially with someone as accomplished as Graham, because Graham is an excellent writer in his own right. I mean, he's creating his own universe over at Compass Comics, and he's done some terrific, you know, horror adventure stories. And so it's always been, you know, we've always been on equal standing. You know, I can't draw the way he can, but I respect his input on all this stuff because he's got a great sense of story and dialogue and character and things like that. And I'm always grateful when he asks me to work with him because I think the end results are always, you know, good comics, really good comics. So yeah, that's a story with me with co-writers. Generally, they either are friends before we start co-writing or they become friends when we're done. So I guess that says something positive about me. Okay, Dan Donovan. All classic adventure characters are to some degree of their time and have elements that are no longer fashionable today. However, some characters more so than others. Is there any way to tell new stories of characters like Tarzan and Fu Manchu, or are they too removed from current social conventions to be palatable to a modern audience? Can those characters be successfully adapted to mass entertainment like movies and/or TV? Well, who is it that decides what's fashionable? Who is it that decides what our mores will be? I like to think that it's up to the individual, but more and more we're seeing a societal push toward a hive mind, toward a new world order, which I see a lot of healthy resistance to. People do not want to be set in lockstep. They don't want to be typecast. They don't want to be told what's acceptable and what isn't. I don't see any reason why you can't tell a classic Tarzan story today. Yes, maybe you want to remove some of the dicier racial elements from the old novels, but that wasn't what those novels were all about anyway. And yeah, I think you could do a Tarzan story. I think you could do any of these stories today, and they would seem edgy because they fly in the face of what we are told is acceptable as far as mores or political viewpoints or whatnot. So why not do, Tarzan? Why not do Fu Manchu? Just dive right into the face of it, and and the offended be damned. The snowflakes. Who cares? Okay, yeah, I would cast an Asian. I would cast a Asian actor as Fu Manchu. I can understand the problems with that. But look at a character like Charlie Chan. Charlie Chan is considered, you can't do him anymore. He's untouchable. He offends too many people. Why? Have any of these people watched a Charlie Chan movie? Yes, he's generally played by a guy of European descent, but that's just the way things were in Hollywood back then. I don't think anybody would think today of casting a white guy as Charlie Chan. And people say, well, it's a demeaning portrayal and all the rest. I don't understand what's demeaning about Charlie Chan. I mean, is Sherlock Holmes being quintessentially English demeaning to Sherlock Holmes? Is Sherlock Holmes seen as a laughingstock or an object of derision in his stories? Well, the same for Charlie Chan. People love these movies, and they love Charlie Chan. He had all the answers. He was the smartest guy in any room he walked into. He was cool, he was courageous, and he had a lot of kids. So what? You see movies from this period where the Irish have a lot of kids, the Italians have a lot of kids. Some people had a lot of kids. How many hillbilly movies where they lost track of how many kids they had? So what? Also, the fact that Charlie Chan was based on a real life character, a true badass Chinese detective who worked in Hawaii with an incredible arrest and conviction record. Just a fearless dude. And Chan was based on him. And these novels and these movies and radio shows are extraordinarily popular. They weren't popular because anybody was making fun of Charlie Chan for being Chinese or deriding Asians in any way. Yes, Charlie Chan had a particular way of speaking, but he was supposed to be an immigrant. Lots of characters had a particular way of speaking. And I don't understand why you couldn't bring the character back. And who is it insulting? An example of this is when the Cartoon Network first premiered on cable, they removed all the Speedy Gonzales cartoons from the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes package because Speedy Gonzales was racist. It was offensive to Mexicans. Well, Mexican viewers, both Mexican Americans here in the United States and viewers throughout Latin America, they wanted to know where Speedy Gonzales was. I see Bugs Bunny, I see Daffy, I see Foghorn Leghorn. I don't see Speedy. What are you, racist? You don't want to have Speedy Gonzales cartoons in your lineup? And so the Cartoon Network had to restore Speedy Gonzales because these people were right. It was racist to exclude Speedy Gonzalez from the lineup because Speedy Gonzalez is a hero. Yes. Is he a Mexican stereotype? Did Mel Blanc give him a funny accent? Yes. Mel Blanc gave everybody a funny accent. Are people in Brooklyn upset by the way that, Bugs Bunny talks? Are people who lisp upset by, Sylvester? It's just, what are we thinking here? What, and who's complaining? 4 or 5 people complain, and 3 of them are probably bots, and our entertainment landscape is altered because of them. The majority of people didn't say, I don't want to see Speedy Gonzalez because it's an affront to Hispanics. Who thinks this way? He's a cartoon character, and he's cool. And quite frankly, he's one of the few Warner Bros. Cartoon characters who isn't an annoying, psychotic pest. He's the hero in his stories. He's saving people. He's not, bugging the hell out of Porky Pig just because he can. He's actually saving the lives of the mice in his village from, marauding cats. It's a rodent version of the Magnificent Seven in every cartoon. So who's offended? And again, all of these old characters, you can bring them back and they would be entertaining and they would enthrall an audience because they're from another era, because they're different. It's what makes them exotic. Look at enduring franchises like The Three Musketeers. The Three Musketeers has been made into movies over and over again. I mean, it was plays, it's been comic books, movies in the silent era. I heard someone once say that every generation gets the Three Musketeers movie it deserves because it's one of these sturdy storylines that's always welcome. There's always a current or recent production, either movies or TV, of the Three Musketeers, because and who among us, especially like average people walking around, have an understanding of this period in French culture? No one. It's just a swashbuckler set in an era that most viewers don't really know anything about other than it looks really cool. Okay, and they're given enough of an understanding of the conflicts between the church and the French royal family and the English. They're given enough of an understanding that the story makes sense. They know who the good guys and the bad guys are. And that's all you really need. And what's attractive is that it's exotic. The dress, the settings, the attitudes, they aren't like today. It's a peek into another era. And someone said, as I said, that every generation gets the Three Musketeers version that it deserves. I'm proud to say that my generation got the best Three Musketeers ever presented on film. The 2 Richard Lester films, which are just fantastic and loyal and accurate adaptations of the original Dumas novel, and the best looking movies ever made, the most grown up of the Three Musketeers adaptations. And I apologize to you people in Gen Y because you got the Charlie Sheen Three Musketeers. Apparently the fates decided that this was the movie you deserved. I'm my sympathies. But as I said, these characters are timeless. We still know who Zorro is. We still know who Sherlock Holmes is. We still know who these characters are. They're part of the zeitgeist. They're part of the pop culture. They're part of our culture in general. And they don't time out. They don't age out. They're enduring, and they endured for decades and decades and generations for a reason. And there's no reason to abandon them now because they don't fit what our ruling elites or our academic community believes are acceptable for us today. They are appealing because they are different. And, there you go. Hey, what you reading? People like this segment, and I'll tell you what I've been reading this week. First, Tex in the Land of the Seminoles. Epicenter Comics is doing the Lord's work in bringing a lot of big fat volumes, reprinting Benelli comics from Italy, Tex being one. They've done some great Dylan Dog volumes and Zagor novels, and a couple of other franchises from Benelli. I hope they get to Nathan Never soon. But this one is it's Tex in the Land of the Seminoles. It's a honking big 400-page hardcover, and I think it's $35, which is a deal for this amount of reading. And it collects a long arc in the monthly Tex Willer books from Italy, in which Tex is falsely accused of murder, has to flee from Texas to Florida, where he gets involved in the adventures with the Seminole Indians in the Everglades. And great story, beautiful art. Mauro Baselli on the writing, and an artist named Rubini. I'm holding the book right now to look up Signor Rubini's first name, and I'm not finding it. Well, he's Rubini. His artwork is terrific. I'll show you some right now. Tex Willer is long-running Italian comic book character, and as I've stated in these videos many times before, the best Western comics ever produced. These are just fantastic stories. They're usually long form. The monthly textbook is 150 pages long. That's a monthly book. So these things are like novels, comic book novels, every month, full trade paperbacks by American standards. And the artwork is always excellent. The stories are always spot on. And I like that the long form gives the story room to breathe. There's a real sense in reading these stories that they are like watching a feature film. And I'm so glad that they're being published in English for the first time. Although Epicenter Comics, they tend to hide their light under a bushel. These comics aren't easy to find. I ordered In the Land of the Seminoles through Gmart, a comic subscription service, but it's not on Amazon. And most of the Epicenter books are not on Amazon. I don't quite understand it. And their website is even hard to find and hard to navigate. So they need to make themselves better known to the American comic buying public, because these really are excellent comics, and the value is there. Like I said, 400-page graphic novel for $35. $29 if you find it discounted. That's a deal, my friend. And as you can see, the work is excellent. Another thing I've been reading is Fantagraphics is doing an absolutely terrific reprint series of Carl Barks's Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge books. I've sung the praises of Carl Barks many times in these videos. This is the latest one, or perhaps just the latest one I read, and it's mostly work of Barks's from the early 60s, 61, 62, and good stories, just as always. Seamless adventures. I think the story is called Not an Old Fable. It's one of the best Bark stories ever about Uncle Scrooge, Donald, and his nephews finding the Fountain of Youth, the famed Fountain of Youth. Once again, a story set in Florida. And I did quite an extensive dissection of this story in a video for Unauthorized TV. If you subscribe to that channel, you can watch it over there. And, a lot of Uncle Scrooge and Donald stories, a lot of Gyro Gearloose stories. It's a terrific collection. Fantagraphics is doing a great job of representing these comics. These scans are from an actual comic book, not from the collection, because I didn't want to bend the collection up in my scanner. But I didn't have any problem bending up a vintage comic. They're doing a great job of representing these comics in hardback form. The only drawback or bonus, depending on how you look at it, is there's these essays in the back in which a bunch of academics give their their lofty view of the comics from some Freudian or Jungian perspective, and they're either annoying or highly amusing, depending on how you look at it. I'm mostly amused at them looking for deeper meaning and deeper themes in the comic and completely missing what Barks was doing in the story. It's like, a forest for the trees kind of viewpoint that they have. And it's kind of funny, as a guy who works in comics, who studies Barks, because the level of craft is amazing. No matter what genre of comics you're working in, you need to read Barks because he invented comic book writing. And there's so much to learn from it, and you read these text pieces in the back examining each story through the wrong end of the telescope, and they miss all of the things that I see in the story. Quite amazing. Hey, if you want to get a hold of me, and all of you did, all these questions are from brunobookstore@gmail.com. This is the way to contact me. Contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. As I said, I didn't get to all of your questions this week, but I'll get to them next time. I will get to them. And keep sending them. Let's not let the bag get empty again, because I want to keep doing these. I want to keep doing these weekly. And, just contact me, brunobookstore@gmail.com. Hey, I got this new book, me and Scott Beatty collaborating again on a book called Unprepped. And it's about a family, two families in the suburbs of and in New Mexico, and they are not prepared at all when the apocalypse happens. And they have to sort of hurry up and get their asses out of town and try to find the remote survivalist compound that their neighbor has told them that he was going to bug out to when the crap hit the fan. It's a survivalist comedy. It's, as I said, it's by myself and Scott Beatty with artwork by Marlon Shoup. And it's from the good folks at Antarctic Press. And issues 1 and 2 are right now at your local comic book shop. And I hope you check it out. And while I got you, Hunter, Ninja Bear is now at Indiegogo. A new campaign, the Kickstarter campaign went great. We're going to give you another shot at getting this. It's the same deal we had at Kickstarter, but now it's an Indiegogo. If you missed out on Hunter Ninja Bear, do not cry yourself to sleep tonight. You've got another shot at getting this graphic novel. 360-page historical epic for $30. You can't beat that with a stick. And when I say epic, it is epic. A ninja clan is threatened by a group of, man-eating, ferocious bears, and they reach out to a bunch of American mountain men, hunters. This is early 1800s, to come to Japan and hunt these bears to extinction. It's a clash of cultures. It's a man against nature story, a man against man story. It's a martial arts story. It's a shoot 'em up. It's everything. It's got a huge ensemble cast of characters and gorgeous artwork by Mel Ruby and Rob Hunter, and just a worthwhile package. If I may say so myself, it's got a damn good story. Story is originally by Tom Finoglio and his brother, but they graciously hired me to script it, and just a really cool effort and the beginnings of Phenom Comics. You can get in on the ground floor. Go to Indiegogo.com. I'll leave the link down below under this video, and you can go over there and help out and get yourself a damn good book in the bargain. A big old fat doorstop of a graphic novel. Hey, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for likes and subscriptions and super thanks. And if you want over to subscribestar.com, thank you for that as well. and I'll see all of you down the road.